Hello everyone, I'm Rosa Groen. I'm a external PhD candidate at Leiden University at the Institute of Public Administration, and I am working at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. My paper is called Twist and Shout, Attracting International Organizations, and then I study how similar frames within governance networks and between project groups and policy receivers are related to success in attracting international organizations. I'm comparing in this paper for cities, for medium-sized Western European cities, Geneva, The Hague, Vienna, and Copenhagen, as you can see in the little pictures over here. And the content of this paper, of this presentation, this PowerPoint, is consists of justification of my study and paper and the research question, the three conceptual lenses that I worked with, the theoretical background of one of these conceptual lenses, methods, results, and a conclusion and discussion. And then I will highlight what I would like to talk about during the conference. Well, a justification of my study, Western European medium-sized cities as The Hague are coping with a lot of competition when attracting international organizations, such as the UN or big international NGOs or quasi-international organizations. And this is increasing, and how cities in cooperation with their host states attract international organizations or IOs has not been studied in depth before. So to keep their competitive advantage, they need to be successful in attracting and retaining international organizations and change their strategies. They are doing that already, changed their strategies, and that's why I took 15 years from 2000 till 2015 to study this subject in depth. I decided to do this with three different conceptual lenses, and these lenses are the instrumental lens, where I look at policy design and benefit for the target group or policy perception. The institutional lens, which is highlighted in this paper, where I look at similar frames between the project group attracting the organization and the policy network retaining the organization, and secondly, between the project group attracting the organization and the international organization representatives. The third lens, the interactive lens, looks at network characteristics, which is more a network analysis. The dependent variable, as you can see over here, is success as fact, so how far a host city made it into the bidding process, and success as interpretation, so when the project group or policy network perceives the case as a success. So when looking at these three lenses with a metaphor, you can see that the instrumental lens, looking at policy design and perception, looks at the board and the chess pieces. The institutional lens is looking at rules and norms of the players, so which rules are the basis of the play of the game of chess. And interactively, I look at how they play the game. So who does what and what is the interaction between the pieces. So a case is most successful when it is successfully attracted, of course, by the city and state, and when the process is successfully perceived. So when zooming in on the theoretical background of the institutional lens, this is based on sociological and normative institutionalism. You all know March and Olson, of course, and Peters maybe choices will remain within parameters established by the dominant institutional values and norms. So the membership, and I'm quoting Peters now, of an institution is argued to create the same sort of perceptual frame. So what I found interesting in this quote is to study is if it actually works that way, if when a project group, so that's a governmental group, and a policy network that is retaining international organization, if they think the same way, they have the same norms, the same perceptual frame, if this is really more effective than not having this perceptual frame, a similar frame. And the second hypothesis is about if the project group attracting the international organizations, if it helps when they have a similar frame or similar priorities and narratives with the international organization representatives already based in the city. So, two aims for this paper: to explore the priorities and narratives of different groups about what is important to international organizations, and secondly, to identify if the argument holds that the higher the overlap within project groups and between project groups and IO representatives, the higher the likelihood of successfully attracting international organizations. My methods: I use the case study method with most similar systems design, meaning that Geneva, The Hague, Vienna, and Copenhagen are all medium-sized Western European cities, political cities, because they all want to have a bigger role in the global politics, and they have the similar background in attracting similar international organizations, all with topics of peace, justice, non-proliferation, and these types of issues, humanitarian issues. So 8 cases I selected with the MDSD, so the most different systems design, because they have different outcomes. You see the ones with the cross at the end are failed cases, and the one with the green think are successful cases. So these 8 cases were the basis of my study, and they all were cases between 2000 and 2015. The case study methods are again 4 cities with MSSD and 8 cases with MDSD, because they have different outcomes, and this way I can compare them in the end. And I use the semi-structured interviews and qualitative data analysis in Atlas TI. So the constant comparative method of Bouye as a part of the interpretative public administration, and a game with cards for the institutional lens. I will explain the game with cards a little bit later. I had interviews with 150 respondents in the 4 cities, so 35 respondents per city between 2013 and 2018. And within these cities, I have 4 different groups: project group of the failed case, the project group of the successful case, the policy network retaining international organizations, and the international organization representatives. So quantitatively very limited was the game with cards, and this game consisted of 22 cards with statements like this city has a high livability, or a high quality of life, or this city is fairly stable, politically stable, or there are relevant centers nearby and cooperative for the international organizations. These kind of statements I asked them to prioritize with 5 most and 5 least important. And in the end, I analyzed the 5 most important elements. And I looked at how their rank ordering differed. What was most important for the qualitative analysis was their motivation, why they chose those 5 priorities as most important elements. I did this with the narratives. I coded the narratives after the interviews were finished and analyzed, and this was the result. For example, in Geneva, where the failed case was the Green Climate Fund, the policy network and the project group were actually quite overlapping. So the relevant centers, they both found it very important. Political situation is stable, was the second that the project group found most important. And then taxes are beneficial. That means that there is a very good host state agreement. And then the physical infrastructure. You see a little bit of difference between the third and the fourth because the policy network also prioritized relevant centers and political situation is stable, but then as a third most important, the physical infrastructure, and then living is easy and international schools, whereas the project group thought taxes were more important and physical infrastructure, and then labor force is available in this city. Another example, so I did this with all cases. These tables, I will not go through them all, but these figures are there for the project group with the policy network and the project group and the international organization representatives for all the cases. So there are 16 tables like this in my study. One example of the successful case and hypothesis 2. So the project group versus the international organization representatives. And this is actually a bit of an outlier because this is UNOPS in Copenhagen, a successful case in 2006. And the project group found taxes, relevant centers, political situation is stable, and then physical very much important for international organization, whereas the international representatives highlighted more the settling in of foreigners is working well, physical infrastructure, and then they found livability and cost of labor force more important, and the level of education of labor force. So this is a big difference between the two groups, whereas the case was actually a success. So in a final table in my comparative chapter, I highlighted, I put all the cases in their boxes of really failed, so a failed as a fact and a failed as a perception, and then really successful were the International Criminal Court and the UNOPS Copenhagen case. So what do we see? That the overlaps, and this is more the quantitative method speaking, so the overlaps in prioritization in Kendall-Stouw was 0.70 for the most failed case of the Arms Trade Treaty Secretariat attracted to Vienna, and it was just a little bit more in the most successful case. So it's expected to be all green in the right lower corner and all red or yellow in the left upper corner. So this hypothesis 1 is not really what I expected. Then hypothesis 2, so between the project group and the IO representatives, was more what I expected, because in the right lower bottom of the table we see that all the successful cases -1, the UNOPS case, which was an outlier, already have high overlaps between priorities and narratives, because I also looked if the narratives overlapped with their priorities in their explanation. And then we see that at the top left, the 4 cases that were failed to attract, and some were a success in their perception but failed anyway, they were all yellow and 1 was red. So what is this actually saying? Well, the results of overlapping narratives of hypothesis 1, this hypothesis could be partially confirmed because most narratives were similar in overlap along with the priorities. But what is very different between the cities is that Geneva had an average overlap of governmental groups of both cases. The Hague had a higher overlap in the successful case, but Vienna and Copenhagen had a higher overlap between the governmental groups in the failed case. So this did not really work as I expected. The second hypothesis, however, worked as I expected because it was confirmed both in narratives and priorities. The higher the overlap, the higher the likelihood of success, which also points in the direction of results in the policy framing literature, the lobbying literature, which states that between different groups the overlap is likely to be more effective than between similar groups. And the conclusions are actually that the study confirms that the convergence of frames between different groups has a higher effect on success than between similar intergovernmental groups. This is an interesting contribution in itself to the normative and framing literature of Schimmelpfennig and Thomas, for example, Baumgartner and Mahoney and Borang and Naring, but it also contributes to the small to medium-sized cities literature, where the locational elements for international organization has not been studied this way before. So due to this study, we now know that the prioritized locational elements are relevant centers are nearby and cooperative, political stability, physical infrastructure, and a good host state agreement. So what I want to pay specific attention to in the discussion is how can I improve the constant comparative methods section, and what does the reader want to know about how I coded and compared my narratives, and how can this paper become more embedded in the interpretative public administration literature. Thank you very much for your attention. By the way, twist and shout. Cities need to twist and shout when they want to attract international organizations successfully. Thank you very much.